What's up, everybody? Jensen Cummings here. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. Today's Best Served Podcast 258, and we're talking Monday Funday with the one and only Peter Kiley. Peter, great to see you.
What's up, Jensen? Good to have you. Or I guess good to be had.
Yes, good to see you face to face. This new face to face interaction. So obviously, we're talking beer in this episode of Best Served Chill. Where we really focus on craft brewers, their inspirations, techniques, the ideas that go into building both the brand, the interaction that you have when you have butts and seats. And we're going to get into why that is so stressful right now, because brewers are so compelled to sit down over a pint. And so I know that's something, Peter, that's important to you. I want to start off kind of create a sense of place for us a little bit. Atlanta, Georgia, Monday Night Brewing. You have such a vibe, such an energy. You know, there's just, it's palpable. Having been there, the beer, it all is an extension of just like this feel good. Where does that come from? Why is that so important to you?
I'm so glad you pick up on that. So, like, from the beginning, the mission statement for Monday Night Brewing has always been to deepen human relationships over some of the best beer in the country. Now, that sounds pretty like cryptic in sense, like that's what everyone's trying to do. But like we do a lot of different things that are kind of like not really like seeable in the scale. It feels so micro, but they all lead to this big macro feeling. So like Atlanta within itself is so hyper transient. It's, you know, it's kind of difficult sometimes to like possess a singular identity just because you have to be so many things for so many people. And you want to be able to stay relevant, especially within the craft beer space, but also like Atlanta's a destination. People want to go there to explore, so you have to give them something to explore. And then that's not even including the people that do just live here. So you also want to make sure that you maintain some sort of sense of normalcy, excitement, and relevance. So all these things together, you come to our brewery, you'll see that we don't have like singular chairs. Everything is, I guess we do now because of COVID, but before COVID, everything was kind of like, we wanted to force a conversation. We wanted to force you to sit next to a stranger. I mean, there's no better way to start a conversation than over a beer with someone that you might not know. We kind of limit live music because we want to be able to hear ourselves think and talk. We want to be able to experience another human being. And ultimately, all of this, the beer is the conduit, right? Like that's the thing that kind of tethers us together. And, you know, right now, of course, things are upside down. But in the perfect world, Monday Night Brewing is here to help just facilitate what it means to be human and what it means to connect with your fellow humans. So like, it's a noble act, and let's be honest, like we're not curing cancer over here, but damn it, are we making things easier? So that's what we try to do.
The human connection, that's the game. That's what we're all here trying to accomplish in any way, shape, or form that we can. And when you're in hospitality, food, and beverage, you are in the relationship business. And so the fact that you are cultivating relationships in every touch point, it matters. And there's two things that you said I want to unpack. You have this ethos that's kind of broad sweeping. You know, like we want to create relationships and we want to make the best beer. It's like people say, well, yeah, isn't everybody? I am such a big believer on the things that go without saying, they don't. You say them early, most often, and loudest, because that's how they become mantra. That's how they become innate in the way that every single brewer and cellarman and bartender, they all interact in that way. It's meaningful. It matters. And to your point, it's layered into the complexity of you aren't from a small town where everybody is already community. You have a lot of forces pulling away from community. It's big, it's bustling, the freeways, the huge airport, it's international city. To kind of have this small place where in that moment you truly feel like you're a part of this small community, that like you have that sense of belonging, it's really hard to create. So you have to be very like more diligent in that than if you're like in a cool little neighborhood in Portland, because it's nice. It's got that tightness built into it. So I appreciate that you're doing that. And talk about the beers as the extension of that. You mentioned them being the conduit. I'm interested in that, in your approach to brewing, how then you manifest that, how then a beer can be kind of the first interaction point to creating that fun, that energy, that vibe that definitely you feel in the tap room. But I feel it from your beers too, even the way you brand them, even the way that you name them. All of these things feel thoughtful to me.
It is thoughtful, and like it's such a great question that you ask because it's such a complex answer to give you. And so
let's get into it, man. Let's get weird.
Well, so like when we think about human nature in its center, I mean I think that we all witness this, that it's almost easier to bond over the things that we dislike versus the things that we do like. So, I mean, God forbid I give them a reason to bond over a bad beer, right? Like that's never the goal. So let's be honest. But from there, you have to understand that, like, when it comes to the balance of, fulfilling, kind of like my brewing soul and then our team soul of what we want to explore, where we want to be experts, where we want to be amateurs. Like, like we practice until we get it right sometimes. And sometimes we practice so much we don't ever get it wrong. So like when we think about those beers within that space, knowing that oftentimes I tell my team so often, I'm like, guys, if we were making beers just for us, this would be a lager house. All right. Let's be honest. We're making beers for everyone. Yeah. And what that means is that it's not just understanding the beers. It's also understanding the people. And of course, as we talked about, Atlanta is just so expansive. There's so many people, so many types. So when we go into our beers, oftentimes, coming from winemaking, going into beer, I've always recognized the power of marketing. But when we think about how we digest our liquids, we first start with our eyes, right? Sometimes even our ears. And then from there, we go to our nose. And then from there, we go to our palate. So first thing we got to do is we have to make exciting beers. They need to be something that just draws the eye. You look at it on the board, maybe it's a funny name. Maybe it's a style that's got some ingredients where you're just like, wow, I got to try that. Maybe it actually is kind of true to Atlanta. Maybe it's something that is, I can't believe this actually exists inside of Atlanta. But then from there, it's like just unpacking all the different routes you can take in order to get to someone's center to where they'll feel comfortable, where they'll feel kind of intrigued by what you're doing, but also feel fulfilled with what you made and what they purchased. I mean, your answer is so complex, and I don't think there's a simple, your question's so complex, but I just don't think there's a simple answer. So like what we try to do at our core is that we want to make a beer grade A to style, but put that little bit of Monday night X factor on it. Whatever that means at the time, we need to be able to express it. We need to be able to help someone understand it. And then ultimately we need to deliver, because let's be honest, if it sounds good on paper, like this is not a press release. This is a beer. It needs to be delicious. It needs to be exciting. It needs to be creative. And ultimately it's got to be beautiful. It's got to be us. So
preach, brother. I love it. Here's what's fascinating. You and I are going to get all existential on everybody right now, and I appreciate that. Everything you're saying makes total sense to me, because you and I hadn't met. I've been to your brewery and had your beer multiple times, and so I understood that. I kind of felt that. Now it's making a lot of sense to me. I sense these things and recognize these things, and now I hear you actually saying them, that they are with intention, right? I think your answer is very simple. I think the execution is amazingly complex and nuanced. You are a communicator, pure and simple. And I've been reflecting on this a lot as a chef, pure and simple. I am just a communicator. I happen to use food, beverage, beer as my vehicle for communication, but you're creating the opportunity for the communication. The beer is not the communication. It's not the end of the communication. It is somewhere in the middle. It's not at the beginning either, and it's not the end. It is the conduit, as you mentioned. So I really appreciate hearing that. I want to take, and winemaking, total sense to me, because there's so much branding and marketing and storytelling that goes into winemaking that I think beer misses a lot. There's a lot that you can learn. And last week on Best Served Chilled, having Jeff Stuffings on, who thinks to the nth degree. I mean, he is like a true philosopher, right? And so he was talking a lot about wine, that there's so much to learn versus it being something where it's like, no, I'm not stuffy winemaker. Well, you don't necessarily need to have this staunch California cab, sense about you, but you can learn a lot from it. So I appreciate that. And I know I'm telling you what you already know. I want to highlight that for people because I think it's very, very important. I want to take one beer, and because now you have me fascinated. Take me from start to finish with one beer that at every level you're like, this is the name of the beer, this is the label, the style, this is how we released it. I'd love to have people siphon some superpower from you, because clearly you're thinking about every step in a very intentional way that I don't hear a lot, and I appreciate that. I want to share that.
Man, so if I had to pick like a case study of a beer,
to put you on the spot, because we did not rehearse this or anything.
No. So I kind of want to lean towards a beer that, in a sense, goes against my ethos, but also is a perfect example of what we try to do here. So there's a beer we actually released just pretty recently. It's called 7 Deadly Stouts. So
It's a lager. It's a lager, right? You said you wanted a lager.
Yeah. It's it's a Cascadian lager. No, so Seven Deadly Stouts was this idea that started about 29 months ago when I sat down with Jonathan Baker, one of our co-founders and our CMO, and we were just talking about, like backstory of Monday Night Brewing is that we kind of started weirdly out of a Bible study, which is odd to think about just because you don't really piece those together. And I can tell you right now, it was probably the most lit Bible study just because we made way too much beer. So we had to start inviting people over for them to help drink it. And once again, just follow that sense of community. So we were thinking about it. We're like, well, let's actually build 7 beers around each one of the sins, just kind of have fun, see what our understanding, our theological understanding looks like in comparison to what we can translate that into a beer. So 29 months ago, brewed this big old double mash imperial stout, and we put it into 7 unique different spirit barrels, one that we felt like kind of matched with each sin. And then originally the plan was to build adjunct profiles around these 7 different beers that would also lend themselves to the sins themselves. So, we're going through this, I think greed was rum because we thought about pirates. And then I was like, well, greed, we got to do black truffles and gold flakes. And we were honestly just thinking of crazy shit, which is one of the most fun parts is the ideation of a beer.
Yes.
So, and so often the beer exists before, the idea of the beer exists way before the liquid does.
Yep.
So we make this beer, we put it into 7 different barrels. It's aging throughout, the course of these 2 years plus. And then COVID comes, and then you're just like, there's a piece of me that wants to honor the intent. I think one of our most important flavors is intention, what we strive to do, because ultimately, I'm a chemist before anything. So I like to believe that if I have a plan, I stick to the plan. If it doesn't work, I document my data. I know to never take that path again. If it does, I can reproduce it. Scientific, theory and experiments. So when COVID hit, you can't go release 7 different beers solely through the fact that it's irresponsible to your consumer base to make them want to come out. Because guess what? Our fans are awesome. They will definitely come out, but it just didn't feel right.
Right.
And also there's always that little bit of fear behind the fear where I'm like, if one of these goes bad, I can't have, the 6 deadly sins, that doesn't really work out. So the last second, I decided that we are going to blend all these together and pick a singular adjunct for each one. So we found 6 different adjuncts within this: coconut, hazelnut, Ghirardelli milk chocolate, cinnamon, vanilla, and then the last one was for sloth. So we just thought the 28, so odd months in barrels is a good time for rest. So then we put this thing together, and as we're thinking about the label design, we need to incorporate all these different aspects. So we were looking back at once again, going back to the old scriptures, looking at what some of these designs have historically looked like around each sin, want to implement them. So this is just a great example about a beer that really sometimes the beers start as an inspiration point, or they start as even as a joke, or we get a name that we love so much that we build a beer around it. Yeah. But ultimately, we always strive to possess intent, because when we tell the story, you don't need to tell the story from a second point of view. You need to tell it from the first person point of view, like we are now. You need to be able to fully understand your story if you expect anyone else to ever understand your story. And ultimately, within craft beer, without the story, there's such an injustice. So every beer must possess its own story, and every story must be able to be told and then be regurgitated. Because ultimately, people, just like in wine, just like within beer, they want to know the story behind the story. They want to understand the people behind the beer. They want to understand how the beer became a beer. Ultimately, there's so much to unpack in each beer. So when I think about that one, I think about just and also backing up 28 months ago, I didn't have either of my 2 kids in the world. So it's looking at a photo, you think back on that day when you filled those barrels, and the same day that you're emptying and racking those things out. You think about where you were when this project started, where you are, where it ended. You see how life has changed all the way around you. Yet the one thing that stays the same is your intent. I intended to make a great beer. I intended to play into this idea of what the sins looked like. Ultimately, I had to change the delivery of it because of COVID. But, at the end of the day, this beer is just one of those examples that sometimes the most complex things about the beers that we drink aren't actually the beers.
Yeah.
It's the people and the stories and the ideations behind them.
You are blowing my mind, friend. This is exactly this is everything that fuels my existence, is being able to find the way to connect the dots between food, beverage, hospitality, and the actual meaning, the actual communication. And for me, it's funny, you're talking the seven deadly sins. I'm 100% with you. I see how all that works. The story is compelling. It's personal moments. But I talk about developing your six senses. And I think of senses as a sense of belonging, a sense of self, a sense of purpose, a sense of place, a sense of time, right? These are the things that are the senses. And belonging to me is always the nucleus of that. Restaurants, breweries, wineries, they create a sense of belonging on both sides of the equation. And if you do that, well, then you win. No matter what's in the glass, you've won, because you have created the opportunity for that communication and to build that community. So I really appreciate that. And you know what? You can have this like very highfalutin philosophy and this ethos, which you do clearly. And it makes sense now, even another layer of thinking of the scripture and thinking of the way that that is how you create a story that lasts forever, right? Is again, that you say it again and again and again, and it becomes mantra, it becomes dogma. And so I think that's a fascinating approach. I think more brands need to think about that. You're also a business owner, so you're thinking about it practically too. You're like, I need to sell this beer and make some damn money so that we can keep having fun and do projects like this. And so give us just a little bit of thought there. How do you make sure that the seven deadly sins is a financially sound decision for you?
I mean, let's be honest, like the economist always pops his head out every once in a while, but really he's got no place in the room. When I think about what it means to succeed, first, it's always people over profit. And especially in a time like this, you start seeing people's true colors, because of course we're all hurting. It sucks right now. But at the end of the day, we started this whole thing for people. You know, this is what it's all about. So like, as we do this, you know, you talk about that bridgeway where it kind of like beer is the conduit that brings us all together. But remember, bridges have got two paths, right? You can get on them and off them, and they go each direction. So like when I think about what it means to make a beer, oftentimes we joke around like internally, like I'm kind of like the vampire here. I just like drain the resources. You know, I'm like, I need money for this, I need money for that. They're like, Peter, stop buying Uganda vanilla beans. I'm like, but they're the best. I gotta have them.
Yeah.
So like, of course, I'm not saying that I disregard the P&L and that I disregard what it means to be a thriving business, because the best way for us to honor our people, both internally and externally, is also to be a thriving business.
Yes.
But guess what? In this space, in this modern craft beer era that we're in, where everything is just so exciting and blowing up, having great beer is just the ticket to ride. And honestly, how can we show people how we are as people if we can't get them in the door? Because let's be honest, they're not, more than likely, they're not going to come here for their first time just because they heard how nice we are. Yeah. They're gonna come for the beer. So like, I always want to focus that like the only way that we get to get our foot in the door is by having beers that make people want to come inside our building. So at the end of the day, if our beers aren't exciting, if our beers aren't honest to who we are and what we want to be, then I don't want them to be our beer. Our beer is how we make our business. And if we sacrifice the quality of the beer, then why are we even focusing on the strength of our business? I know that my CMO and my CFO and a lot of other people probably disagree, but this is why I exist inside these walls, is to make sure that the thing that is who we are stays who we are, and no other way around it.
Yes. Here's what I like. You're trying to break everything, and I'm the same way. I love it. It's that visionary thing. I'm trying to break everything, and Sophie and Andrew Parr, our team, they have to like hold me together. Just like, all right, Jensen, that's cute. That's a great idea. Let's actually make it viable. What you've done is what I try to do. You started it with 4 people, you said. Well, you made sure that those people complimented you, that there was trust and confidence, that they believed in the vision, and that they're with you on that journey. And they're also going to every once in a while say, let's maybe think about that for 1 second and question a little bit. And I always really, really appreciate having that question, because it makes me a deeper thinker. And I very much, it seems like we're simpatico on that 100%. And I really appreciate that. And your people matter in all sides of the equation. If it's your ownership team, if it's your line level team, if it's your guests, they all really, really matter. And again, you have intent around that. And I want to go further into a case study, because our mutual friend, Aaron Boonson. Aaron and I worked together 20 years ago at my uncle's restaurant, Wallaby's Bar and Grill in Ames, Iowa. He's an Iowa boy. I moved out there from Southern California when I graduated high school. Talk about culture shock, right? And found my tribe. I was like, these crazy restaurant people, that's me. I was like, you can be brilliant in this moment. It is a thinker's game, and you get your knuckles bloody. Like, I loved everything about that, and I didn't have to, punch in and punch out in a cubicle. It very much was finding my people, and Aaron was there at the very early stages of that, who then went on, got into brewing, and Avery is where he really made his bones, and then he's been with you, a few years now, right?
Yeah.
All right. Somebody like Aaron, why is it important for you to create space for somebody like Aaron to be able to thrive?
Well, I mean, I feel like that's one of the easiest answers. Like,
let's go.
Even if you are a bad person who's selfish and you only think inwards and you try to think about what can make my life easier, of course you want your people to be great, because then they take off a lot of work off your plate, right? But like, when we think about people on our end, we think about what does it actually mean to work for Monday Night Brewing? I oftentimes make the whole analogy about relationships. Like, why would you give your best to someone that is not reciprocating that behavior? And, this work environment, it's difficult. It's high pace. Oftentimes it's really decisive kind of work. Like, we don't really talk about things when we're on the, the operating table. We do these little after action reviews and stuff like this. Like, we foster growth on every single level. So when you think about someone as talented as Aaron, we got him. He came from Avery over in Colorado, and he was really talented. I remember the first few phone interviews I had with him, which, if you ask anyone that works for Monday Night Brewing, we have the most ridiculous interview process.
Yes.
Because and this sounds weird, and I know that I'll probably get a lot of questions around this, but we actually don't hire for talent. We hire for character here. Because
all the sense in the world, it's the only thing you should do.
But so many people just look at what your pedigree is, like where you've worked, what are you capable of?
Nope.
Like, we're so protective of our apples, just because if we had some rot in here, everything falls apart. That's been the hardest part about building the brewery, has been developing the culture and the people. It's not actually about developing the brand or creating the right liquid or having the right infrastructure. Like, your people are your business. Your people are your beer. Your people are everything. So someone like Aaron, the first few times I talked to him on the phone, I was like, wow, and he's a great friend of mine. So I'll be very honest. I was like, dude, this guy is smart, but damn, is he boring? Like, I gotta get him here in person, because I have to see it. I have to see it with my eyes. Like, so often, how we communicate doesn't always represent who we are.
Right.
So I was like, I'm gonna fly this guy out. I got to see what he's like in real life. So we actually picked him up straight up from the airport. We were there. So we're like, the interview started the second he got in the car. We're like, all right, let's chat. Yeah. And of course, he goes to every single person in our executive team. He spends 2 days out here. He ends up sleeping at our houses. Like, it is like the most invasive interview. And of course, we don't really do that as much now. We'll get you a hotel nowadays. But, by the end of it, remember, any good interview is not you just vetting that person. It's also them vetting you. Because I knew that if he wanted to come on this team, if he wanted to be developed, he also needs to trust who's going to be teaching him. It's not just what he's going to be able to give to us. It's what are we going to be able to give to him? And with someone with the talent that he has and the understanding of beer and process knowledge that he possesses, he's also a Cicerone, so he's got a great palate. He runs our sensory program now. Like, a guy like that is not an accident. It's not an accident that he works for us, and it's not an accident that we got to hire him. All of this is a concerted effort to make sure that we understand each other on a human level. Because once we understand each other on a human level and we actually develop a real relationship, then we can get to work. Work doesn't ever come before the relationship. If it does, I guarantee the product will taste just like it. It will be unsuccessful, and it will be confusing, and it will not represent who we are and what we are about. We are about our people. So all day, like a guy like Aaron, just like a lot of our people, like, we will take the time to get to know each other, make sure this works. If it doesn't work, there's no hard feelings. But if it does work, then, like, damn, let's get to work, because this is exciting. That's buy-in all day. I love buy-in.
That's mic drop, my friend. That is, we're ending this episode because it could not get away. Let me tell you, the amount of sound bites and video clips that are coming from this episode, it might be the most we ever have. Now I feel like there's a gauntlet thrown of so good. Everything is so thoughtful. and intent filled and intentional. And I think that's super important, because if you do that, well, then the beer, that's just the fun, easy part. Like, that's the good stuff. Like, everything else is what layers into the opportunity to actually create that great beer. And I love it. And the relationships are so important, because Aaron trusts you enough to jab him a little bit. And I know Aaron is very dry, a little bit curmudgeon-y, and you kind of like, you love him for it. You know what I mean?
The dude is amazing. He's so much
Yeah.
fun to work with, because also, once again, we talk about how hard it is to work here. Like, you definitely want to have your safe space. You want your personal life to be your personal life, and you want your work to be your work. But it's really nice when you get to come to work and actually enjoy who you work with.
Imagine that.
There's so much to be said about not just what you do, but who you do it for and who you do it with. So let's be honest, if you're going to dedicate your life to something, you got to make sure that you're in the right environment to not just succeed, but just to be able to last. Because sometimes that's the hardest part about succeeding, is just not being in the right place to actually succeed. So we just want to make sure that we got the right dojo over here, right? We got to do work.
That's it. Peter, amazing. I knew this was going to be good. Amazing. I really, really appreciate it. You got my spidey senses going all over the place. This is exactly the type of conversations I love having, because it makes me just love beer even more, because again, it's just like, there's so many good people behind it. And I love that you are creating the opportunity to highlight those people through the beer, and getting enough people to give a shit about the beer, to buy the beer because the beer is good enough. It all matters. You and I could go for days. We're total philosophers here, where we just want to wax poetic. I love it, and I really appreciate it. So Peter Kiley, again, of Monday Night Brewing, thank you so much for being on. Thanks for sharing with us.
Man, it was a pleasure being here. Hope everything's well. Good luck with the other side of COVID.
Yes, sir. And I'll be coming, as I mentioned before we went on, the ATL, the most underrated food and drink city in the country. I'm an absolute all-in believer, and there's so many great people there that are doing amazing work. And so I love that you've made that the place where you're going to make your stand to show what's possible. And so have a great day. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Cheers, man.
Cheers. All right, everyone. Peter Kiley. Wow. Also, again, a peek behind the curtain, I see Sophie behind the scenes. She's moving all the banners around, moving the camera angles around, and the whole time just nodding her head, because she knows this is the type of conversation we need to be having. This is what makes people actually care enough to buy your beer. It has to be this depth of conversation. It has to be this depth of thoughtfulness and intent that we kind of came back to those words a few different times. It's so important. That is it for this episode and this 5-part series of Best Served Chilled. Best Served Chilled will continue to come at you. We're actually going to get into some winemaking coming up pretty soon. So we're going to talk wine a little bit. And I love that our last two guests really highlighted how important wine is, and wine thinking and process and techniques to craft brewing. So I think some of our craft brewing audience might want to tune in to the winemaking, because there's a lot to learn. And that's what it's all about, building those relationships, creating the opportunity. I appreciate you all so much, as always, for tuning in. Cheers.